welcome to the Blind Gamer Podcast. Yes, this is a little bit different for me. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is also an audio episode, and if you're listening to this as an audio episode, yes, this is also on YouTube. So this is a YouTube video / podcast audio episode of the Blind Gamer Podcast. I know I say pretty much every single time I do an episode of the podcast, it's been a while, but it definitely has been a while. And so I'm excited to be able to kind of jump back in today, because today, pretty much the topic of the show is all going to be Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and what I thought about the game itself, as well as the accessibility of the game. I don't like to be able to call this a review, just because I don't like to sort of give sort of my thoughts of sort of on a scored base level of being able to try to convince you to be able to purchase the game. I'm kind of like, I'll give my own impressions of it, and you can take that information and decide for yourself. If you feel like there's certain things that you can kind of, you know what, are not necessarily great, but then, and you don't feel like the game is right for you, then don't play it. If you feel like that my thoughts are at least kind of give you at least a little bit of information and be like, yeah, I think this would be the game for me, then I would definitely recommend it. So I never want to be able to force you into be able to purchasing game, but I'm just going to give at least my thoughts. So like I said, this is going to be more of an impressions than necessarily a review. I have to say up the very top that this game was provided to me by EA. They graciously gave me a game to be able to participate in their user research project. So this is going to be kind of part of that. So thank you so much to EA for providing the game for me to play. To kind of give you a little context as to where I am in the game, I actually rolled credits for the story last night. So I have completed at least the main story of the game. I've done a little bit of exploring in different planets. So I've done a bit of that. But the story I am definitely done and finished, and I can at least give my impressions on that. I also actually did a gameplay and an accessibility menu overview. Or settings overview on my YouTube channel. If you listen to this as a podcast, you can go to youtube.com/snowball. Or if you're watching this on a video, you can be able to click in the link in the description below. Or you can be able to do that if you're looking through it on your phone, listening to this, and you can be able to click on the links within the description if your app allows you to do that on whatever podcast service that you prefer. And it actually kind of basically the accessibility menu overview kind of gives you at least a visual representation of what the menus are like, what settings are available for accessibility or not. And then also I recorded my first sort of playthrough of, I think it was probably the first chapter-ish, or at least the majority of the first chapter of the game. Essentially kind of the main first planet that you're on. So it's not really kind of, I didn't want to spoil a lot of things for you, but essentially I just wanted to kind of give my first thoughts of what it's like to be able to play the game at the very beginning. So that being said, let's jump into a bit of the review. So I'm going to pull up my notes here because I do have some notes that I want to be able to touch on. So it's not just going to be a rambling mess today. I want to touch on the story of this game. If I had to choose what my favorite story of the year when it comes to games I've played, this would definitely be the game of the year for me for best story. I think the only thing that would come close would definitely be Control. Control is just a massive, amazing story, and I love what it did. But as far as this game and it's sort of tied to Star Wars, this is like this. If you're a Star Wars sort of fan or a Star Wars geek or nerd that at least understands a little bit of the sort of the legacy, sort of what they call Star Wars Legacy, Star Wars Legends, what they kind of consider the expanded universe before Lucasfilm was bought by Disney, and sort of the Legends universe, sort of like. This fits very well within that, and there's a few kind of nice nods to some of the newer movies that have come out, and also some of the prequel stuff, because this sort of the story fits in, without kind of giving a little bit of spoilers, it fits in between episodes 3 and 4. So Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. So it's sort of set actually about 5 years after the Order 66, that essentially where the Republic essentially turned into the Empire and destroyed all of the Jedi. Not all, because as in this game, you do play as a Jedi who is hiding from what they call the Purge. And I won't get into the more specifics of this, but essentially you're a hidden Jedi, and things kind of happen at the very beginning that sort of send you off on your story, and it keeps you interested throughout. Now, I've seen a lot of people that sort of like comment of like the beginning is really good and the ending is really good, but it kind of like lists in the middle. I would have to agree kind of a little bit. If I just sort of like grade this on a bit like, or the story on a sort of like a roller coaster ride, it really kind of ramps up at the very beginning. It kind of dips a little bit in the sort of like the first like quarter to halfway through, and then it starts to kind of pick up halfway through and keeps going, and it just gets more and more intense, and more like it just, but intense in a way that it gets more fun to play. Like as far as a story base, because you're invested into this, you want to be able to move on to the next mission and to see what happens next, and kind of advancing the story. And it's a story that like it takes you by surprise. It's a story that that you're excited to sort of see, like the seeds that they kind of plant at the very beginning. You want to see them play throughout, and also even the side characters, your kind of crew that you get to play with and interact with. They don't kind of join you on your journey as a separate AI, but they're just kind of they're part of your crew in a sense, and they are just so well written. I absolutely loved talking to Grease and to Seer, and I don't want to spoil anything else, but they're the two that you meet at the very beginning of the game. But there's a few other people you talk to throughout the entire game. And honestly, BD1 is probably my absolute favorite droid out of all the droids that are in Star Wars. I mean, I love him more than R2-D2, C-3PO, BB-8 combined. Like, I want a personal BD1 to sit on my shoulder and just be my friend and be my buddy. I just want to protect him and hold them close. And BD1 is just so dang precious to me. And there's even one cool moment at the end with BD1 that I'm like, yes, that's the one I want to see. It's so cool. It was so amazing to watch, and I absolutely loved the interaction with all the characters that you do. Like, all the characters are, I don't want to say like as far as narrative wise, because if like I'm not attacking this as sort of like a narrative. I'm not approaching this as a sort of a narrative. Like, I'm not a script writer. I'm not a playwright. I'm not a storyteller per se. But to me, I felt like at least the characters were very well fleshed out. You get to know a little bit more of their personality, a little bit of their backstory. It made me want to be able to know more about them and learn more about them, and basically, like, I just want to be there, like, with them on their journey. And I would say, as the character you play, who was Cal Kestis, played amazingly within the game. I'm forgetting the actor's name. I think it's Dominic Monaghan. No, that's not it. That's a guy from Lord of the Rings. I forget his name now off the top of my head. And I would look it up, but I'm not going to. I'm recording. I don't want to look it up and waste your time. But anyway, you can find it online. It's all right. It's all right. He actually, like, a lot of people sort of say that he's kind of very vanilla and there's not really much happening with his character. I actually kind of would, like, I heard that sort of going in, and I sort of had kind of half expected that sort of his character is not going to be really like fleshed out. It's kind of be very basic, and to a certain degree I would agree with that, but there was actually some surprises of certain things that happened with him that I was kind of taken back by. I was like, oh, okay, there's a little bit more, there's more to him than what I felt I was told was sort of like on a surface level of the character. So I don't think he's completely vanilla, but then again, I definitely see where the people are coming from on that. He's just a very kind of average sort of Jedi, and I think they kind of kept that purposely, or Respawn and EA kind of kept that purposely, so it sort of feels like that you can find yourself within this character, and that's hard to be able to kind of create. I think if they were trying to go for a full absolute narrative sort of character, like something you would see from like Nathan Drake in Uncharted, or even Joel and Ellie, like, and I'm sort of picking on Naughty Dog games, but like even some of the like characters from Assassin's Creed, like you would want to be able to sort of see like more about that character. But I think what EA and Respawn were going for was mostly try to be able to create a character that you can connect with more so than just you embodying the character that the game creates. So I enjoyed it for that aspect. It was sort of, I did feel a little bit of myself, like some of the things that that happens. I was like, yes, no, that's something that I would react to very much in the same way. But so yeah, I would say, and I've heard it said before. I think Tim Geddes a kind of funny on the review. I think he said he heard it from someone else, but I like to be able to repeat it. It's essentially, this game is a jack of all trades, but a master of Star Wars, and that is very true in this. If you are a Star Wars fan, this is an amazing entry into the Star Wars universe. I would say, excuse me. It definitely hits right up there with some of the best Star Wars stories that I've ever participated in, but also ever watched slash heard. So I would, if you're interested in sort of the story, and you're kind of a little bit more not necessarily interested in sort of the gameplay aspects. There are definitely some gameplay aspects that are good, and then there's some that are bad from an accessibility standpoint, and then there's also some technical glitches. If you're like, that's the thing, it's like there are definitely some issues with the game, but that doesn't overshadow the fun I had in this game. And I would say it's pretty close, like I said, story-wise, to being my favorite game of the year. And as far as accessibility game of the year, I probably wouldn't give it that for sure. It definitely has some very good points, but it definitely has some things for improvement. But I'll get into that in a sec. So essentially, that's the story. I would definitely recommend it for the story itself. The gameplay essentially kind of goes like very much like a Souls type of game, where essentially like, and it makes sense from what the Respawn was trying to go for with the combat, because a lot of Star Wars games in the past, you're very much like hacking and slashing with a lightsaber, and that's kind of the gameplay that you're going for. And there was never really kind of like, you never really felt like you were a master of the lightsaber in those type of games. I think the closest I ever felt to that might have been, I want to say Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, or maybe even Knights of the Republic. But I mean, that even then, it's sort of like Knights of the Republic sort of takes a turn-based RPG kind of style, where Jedi Outcast is more of the hack and slash. So I never really felt like I was a master of or becoming a master of the lightsaber. So in a sense, the Souls-like gameplay for a decision for this game, it makes total sense. Like, you really do feel like when you're swinging your saber, or you're blocking a laser bolt or another saber, or a baton, or whichever, you really do feel like you are in full control of that saber. And then as you kind of progress throughout the game, you unlock new force abilities that can kind of enhances the way that you become a full grown Jedi Knight. And I think that regardless of sort of the controversy of the Sekiro sort of debate this year, of like it being a preset difficulty with certain things, and I will say this, like the Souls-like type of games, they are very hard to play, not only just for average sort of gamers, but also just hard enough for even those with disabilities. It's even harder for that. And so that's why games like Sekiro or Bloodborne, or any of those types of games usually from Software, those are something that I would never really be able to play, or at least do well without being frustrated. What this game does is that it adds in specific difficulty settings that you can be able to sort of at any given point in the game drop in and out of as you see fit. So I started the game in, they have 4 difficulty settings. They have Story Mode, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, and Jedi Grandmaster. And what's cool about it is actually they sort of, before you even start the game, they show you what actually the difficulty the settings, what they actually do, and what they affect within the game. And it's usually sorry, I'm just blank for a sec. Essentially, it's your parrying, it's the enemy aggression, and also like damage you take from the enemy. And the difficulty settings kind of distribute that based on which you choose. So Jedi Knight kind of like, it gives you a little bit more flexible when it comes to being able to parry your enemy's attack, but it also like lessens the amount of like damage an enemy does, and also lessens the amount of like times an enemy will attack you when you're fighting them. I did find about a quarter way through, I switched down to story mode, which is the easier setting, or a little bit less forgiving, or more forgiving setting. I didn't want to try out Jedi Master, Jedi Grandmaster, because I knew those would be difficult, even just when I'm trying to be able to like attack a stormtrooper, as it were. And I did that because it was starting to get to a point where it was really difficult to be able to progress forward, or feel like that I was progressing forward. And so there'd be times I'll be like, okay, I'm in a fight. I've got like a bunch of enemies attacking me at once, and I'm able to sort of like parry a bunch and kind of dodge out of certain ways. And I was sort of doing okay, and I was actually doing a lot of damage, and I was able to clear a group of enemies in a very easy way. But then as I kept progressing, all of a sudden I'd be like the same type of enemies that I would be fighting later on would all of a sudden be like, it would take like a good like in between 5 and 10 minutes just to be able to knock everyone out, and to be able to kill the enemies. And so I was like, it felt weird that in one moment, same group of enemies, same enemy type, like let's just say for instance it was stormtroopers, or like the any of those, like the human type enemies, or alien type enemies. If I don't know if they kind of I don't know in Star Wars if they said that there's aliens as stormtroopers. It's usually clones, or is it clone troopers or enemies? I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if they've ever actually kind of in any of the legends sort of said like there's any aliens as stormtroopers. But we'll just say in stormtroopers, when I'm fighting them, I would be fighting them, and I would like one moment I'd be like, yes, okay, I've blocked this one, I've kind of parried this laser shot that got him, and I've knocked them down, I've taken them out, and then I've got a few of the other troopers that have like batons that I'm essentially blocking their and I'm doing well, and within like 30 seconds to a minute, I've kind of knocked them all out. But then 5 minutes later, I'm in a similar scenario where I've got the same kind of stormtroopers around me, but for whatever reason, it's taking longer for me to be able to defeat them. And I could never really learn. I didn't feel like I was learning. It just felt like I was trying, like my eye-hand coordination just wasn't able to figure out the timing, the parry timing right. And I would lose a lot of health really quickly. And then I would die really quickly. And then it just got frustrating to a point where I had to drop down to story mode. And the exact moment where I did, and this is a minor spoiler, but I won't really give away too much. Essentially, there's this one point. I'll say this: you're on Dathomir. Those who have played it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's one point in Dathomir, and you have these save points as what they call meditation points. So it's similar to like the campfires in other Souls-like games. So that's your meditation. Well, that's your point to be able to save, and that's the point that you'll always respawn to if you die. So there's this one particular point where I meditated, and then I'm going through and I'm trying to be able to defeat a bunch of enemies that are like, I'm going through these caves, and and there's like, I think there was a total of 11 enemies that 11 humanoid enemies that essentially you're fighting, and they're not like creatures. Essentially, you can be able to just kind of dodge out of the way, and then just eventually kind of like just keep attacking them. These ones will attack back, and it's like they've got at least a decent more of an AI than what a creature does. And it was 11 enemies that I was fighting before I can get to another meditation point, and I just could not get past it. I think I probably spent a good hour maybe an hour and a half to just trying to move on to the next section, and it was inconsistent as far as like where I would sort of die. Sometimes I would die at the very beginning of where the meditation point was. Sometimes I would die about 3/4 of the way through, halfway through. It just didn't matter. It was just like, it felt like that I wasn't learning and like the how to be able to use the saber properly. And it was inconsistent for me, and that could be the game style. It could be just my own like eye-hand coordination. I'm willing to kind of bet it's more my hand coordination that just wasn't able to get past that sort of certain level. So once I dropped down to story mode, then it became a little bit easier. The enemy, or the damage I was taking from enemies, was far less, and it became much more enjoyable and less stressful when I'm playing. I will say I kind of wish maybe story mode would be maybe a tiny bit harder, because I did find that there were times where I would literally just like even at boss fights, I would kind of clear them out in one go, and I guess that's kind of the point where it sort of feels like you're not necessarily in any danger or any kind of feel like you're gonna like it's gonna be too difficult. I get that, but it literally, like, if I had a full amount of health and a few stim packs, I could pretty much clear a boss enemy in one go. Which is fine. Like, for some people that may be the better way to be able to go about it, and for myself, I did feel like it was a challenge. There was definitely some enemies that like it posed a different like sort of style of like, okay, how do I defeat this one? It sort of like allowed you to be able to add some strategy to it. But also what was good too is that it didn't punish you so much if you made a mistake and or you missed a block, or you missed a dodge, or you missed an unblockable sort of situation, and the boss enemy will kind of get you and take down a bunch of your health. So I did feel like that was nice, but I kind of wish maybe it was just a little bit more challenging for that. So it was like, story mode was great, but bump it up a little bit, and I would have felt like, okay, at least then I'm like, it's forgiving, but it's not too forgiving, if that makes sense. But then once I switched over to story mode, the game became far more enjoyable. Like I said, less stressful. I was able to focus it on the story aspect of it, and not necessarily just trying to be able to fight with the gameplay. It was great. I highly recommend it. If you're playing this game and you find that the level that you chose is not right for you, so don't be afraid to kind of knock it back to a certain level. And if you want to dump it or bring it back up to a higher difficulty later on, please do so. Like, that's the great thing about the difficulty settings. You can be able to jump back and forth as you see fit. Even if you're in the middle of a boss fight, you can go in and switch out your difficulty settings, which is great. It's so key, especially like when you're halfway through and you've tried to be able to defeat this boss for like 50 times and you can't get through it. If you just bump it back to story mode or to a lesser difficulty setting, and you're able, just so you can get through it, and you jump it back up again, then that's totally fine. And the game it allows you to do that, and it's not as super being like it's trying to force you into a particular path or a particular difficulty setting. So I find like that was like, if any sort of game wants to be able to sort of tackle a Souls-like difficulty, this is a great sort of a response to that, especially with the preset. I know this was in development even before the argument of the preset difficulty or easy mode in Sekiro, but this was like it feels like a response to that conversation, being like, this is a great way to be able to add an easier difficulty mode, but it also makes it cater, like you can custom play it the way you want to play it. And I would say, like, I would definitely recommend it. Like, if you're looking into sort of seeing how preset difficulties, like if you want to get into difficulty settings, this is a good way to do it. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of sort of what they call story mode. I mean, I get it. They don't want to call certain things easy, medium, or hard, and I get even within the Star Wars universe, it's kind of hard to do like Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, or Jedi or Grandmaster, and you don't necessarily want to set like your easy mode to say maybe Padawan, because I would sort of feel like you wouldn't upgrade. Actually, you know what? Now I'm saying this out loud, Padawan would have been a cool setting instead of story mode. I mean, I get it. I understand why, but Padawan would be kind of a cool way to go about it, because just in the way the story, like it actually ties into the story pretty well, and I think that would have been really cool. So I don't know, like I actually, now I'm thinking about it after completing the story, yeah, that would have been a pretty cool way, and I would not have been upset about that, and sort of making feel like, I think if they said it to youngling, that would have been a bit like a little bit more like too cheesy, and like, nah, you should probably have thought that. But having his Padawan would have been interesting if you want to keep with the Star Wars lore. But anyway, it's enough about sort of the difficulty settings, but I highly recommend it just for that. For low vision accessibility though, and I'll get sort of, I'm going to break down, that's the accessibility review I have of the game. So I'm going to start off with essentially my own personal disability, which is low vision, and then I'll kind of go over briefly of the general accessibility, that stuff that I found that worked, that don't work too well. But I won't say that this is just based on my own experience of having these disabilities, because of course I don't have these disabilities. There are a few other disability advocates that are also giving their thoughts on their accessibility, so I would definitely highly recommend checking those out. And if I can find a few that have already been posted, I will link that into the description of this podcast, or on the YouTube video, so you can be able to check those out. You can be able to kind of get a full overview of the accessibility. But I'm going to at least talk on my aspect of it, which is the low vision accessibility. And I will say it's not the greatest for low vision. It's kind of one of those games. It's kind of like, it's not a huge. It's kind. I'm trying to think of the best way to be able to say it. It's not necessarily a. It's not the worst contender when it comes to low vision accessibility this year, but it's not the best either. It does fall into the trend that's been happening this year with games that are coming out. It does fall into the small text category, which for some things actually works. Like, some text is okay, some text is not. And I chose to be able to play this game on Xbox One because it had the better magnifier settings, or at least accessibility settings within the system itself, that allowed me to be able to play the game and not have to worry about having to lean in close to the screen in order to be able to see. That's something that I was very happy about. PlayStation doesn't really have a zoom feature. It does, but it's like, you can't adjust it at all on the fly, and it's not that great. And of course, it's not on Nintendo Switch, which has a zoom feature, so I can't play it there. PC, I probably could have, but I'm not, like, I prefer to kind of play this game on with a controller. So Xbox was my choice to play this game, and using the Xbox magnifier was the best way for me to be able to play this game. It's not the most extreme user friendly, because essentially, like, I actually have my controller here. You have, in order to be able to use the magnifier, first you have to enable it. So you have to push and hold the Xbox One when it's on to bring up essentially the menu to turn off the console, turn off the controller. But if you have the magnifier turned on, you basically push this button, which is I guess not the menu button, but the other options button, and then you can be able to turn on magnifier. And then it uses the triggers to, like, a left trigger to zoom out and right trigger to zoom in, and you can sort of use the right thumbstick to be able to move around the screen, which is great, which is exactly kind of how Windows sort of magnifier works. It uses you can push two buttons to be able to and scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in and zoom out, and then you can and you can move your mouse around the screen, and the screen will follow with you. So it's very similar in that regard. But once you have the magnifier turned on, and even if you zoom completely out, there'd be times actually I would forget that it's in, and you can't, like, all of a sudden it's like, wait, why can't I move my camera? It's because it locks out the right analog stick when magnifier's turned on. So there'd be times I would have to, like, double tap the Xbox button to double tap the Xbox to kind of jump in and out, and sometimes I would accidentally hit it and only once, and it would bring up the quick menu to go home, and so I'd have to okay, get out of it and then do it again. So it, like, unfortunately, it's just because it's just a hard button to push. It would be a little easier to be able to kind of, if it was able to, like, sort of like maybe a touchpad or like a little bit less sensitivity on it, where I could be able to push in and out and to be able to get in quickly. Essentially, what I was hoping for was the ability to be able to kind of quickly zoom in, quickly zoom out, and then not have to worry about missing out on gameplay. I didn't really use it too much when I was actually playing the game. There was a period at the very beginning where I did, because I found that with they decided to put the button prompt tooltips onto the right side of the screen, which for me excuse me, I'm sort of like, oh, I have like, my mouth is really dry and I don't have any water with me. Hold on. Last bit of water. Okay, anyway, so it actually put it on the right side of the screen. And for me, because it's like I'm not really like actively looking at the right side of the screen so much, I have to sort of like lean in close in order to be able to see what it says. And by that point, if I'm in the middle of a fight and it's telling me to be able to hit one button to be able to get out of it, or to be able to do like progress forward or learn something new, I can't see it that quickly. So I would use the magnifier, zoom in so I can be able to see it, and then by that, like, it doesn't really pause the game when that is happening, when a button prompt kind of tooltip kind of comes up, so it doesn't give you the time to be able to read it. If the game did that, that would have been great. That would make it a lot easier for me to take my time. Okay, like zoom in, read it, zoom back out, get back into it, and then I'm off to the races. This game didn't do that. I think probably if the tooltip was kind of more in the center of the screen, or kind of more central to where your eye generally is, then it would have been a little bit easier, or at least be able to make it the text a little bit bigger, for me to be able to see at a glance, for just so I can be able to know what I need to push really quickly and then kind of get out of it. That would have been great. But the magnifier kind of worked pretty well, especially within the menu system and the skill tree, that when you're kind of getting into meditation points. I use the magnifier a lot in order for me to be able to see, which doesn't excuse the game in and of itself. So like basically you only be able to like get this to work within Xbox, but if you don't have an Xbox and you're playing it on your PlayStation or on PC, PC might have a few options, but PlayStation, you don't really have any options to be able to zoom in. So I would say unfortunately, there's the text is a little too small for you to be able to see. And as far as I haven't really tested out fully the screen reader aspect of it, but it doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't really read that out for you, at least in my test of it. And I could have maybe not had it set properly, but yeah, it would have been like the text is just unfortunately a little bit too small for something like that. Like I said, it was difficult to use at the beginning of the game, but once I kind of like figured out the button prompts and the tooltips, kind of like they eventually kind of like slowed down, or wasn't really as come up as much. I didn't really use a lot of the magnifier within the gameplay, but within the menus I definitely did. And the text in the menus unfortunately is too small. Well, I don't say like it's too small. Like it definitely, like any text size could have been bigger, but it's not like it's egregious to where it's like it's really hard to be able to see. It definitely is difficult for me to be able to take a look at. However, though, on the offside of that, the subtitle size was perfect at the highest difficulty set. I was actually, or not difficulty setting. So the cool thing actually is the subtitles actually gives you the ability to be able to scale the subtitle size, which is absolutely amazing. And the max size it goes is 15. I don't know what that breaks down to pixel wise as far as how the large font. I'm willing to guess probably within the 40s pixels size of font, or at least of size. But I can't really know for certain. But at least the highest within the game, the highest setting is 15. And I tried it out. Actually, if you look into, if you watch my gameplay video, you can actually be able to see what that 15 size looks like, and it is great. It's a very easy readable font. It also allows you to be able to add the speaker tag, so you know exactly who's speaking, but then also gives you an opaque or transparent background, and which is awesome. You can be able to adjust those settings as well, and subtitles just look great. I was very impressed with how they looked, and even it doesn't, and I'll get into sort of the general accessibility in a sec. Actually, you know what? I'll talk a little bit about the hearing. I wish it actually did a little bit more of, I guess, the sound effects, so that you knew, sort of like if you had a stormtrooper behind you and you hear, and they're shooting their blaster at you, you don't really know whether they are shooting at you because there's no indicator that that someone is attacking you from, say, behind you. It just basically it is mainly used by from sound and from audio, which is sad. But as far as speaker dialogue, anything that there's dialogue within the game, there is subtitles for. Even when you're just at the beginning of the game, and you're wandering around sort of the wreck of one of the Star Destroyers on Baraka, you can actually hear you can hear conversations happening around you, and there actually is subtitles for that. Even BD1, who is basically just a bunch of beeps and boops, but they actually like add those as subtitles, and it's great because especially when you like, because there are times in the game you're having a conversation with BD1, and it actually like it's really cool to be able to see that you're actually like you can they have the subtitles for it, and it like, oh man, it just it's so cute, especially with like when BD1 talks, and it's just you can be able to see that as subtitles. So I will say that for it could have done better when it comes to sound effects for deaf and hard of hearing accessibility, but as far as subtitles for anything dialogue driven, it's great. Although there is one moment at the end, and I won't spoil it for you, there is one moment at the end that I wish they were able to add in a subtitle for, because it would have made a really cool moment translate really well for deaf and hard of hearing players. I think visually it looks cool, but like you're missing something at a certain point that it would have been really cool to have it, but it didn't have a subtitle for, which I was slightly disappointed in, but it just, oh man, it would have been really cool if they had that, at least something for that, because they took so much care into the dialogue of this that it would have been awesome to be able to kind of add in this one element. It would have been, for anything dialogue driven, it would have been absolutely great. But I actually did keep the subtitles for myself on. I lowered the size. Instead of 15, I lowered it to about 9. And that seemed to work pretty well for me. I was able to read it without having any strain, and I also kept the background turned on and the speaker tag, so that was great to be able to kind of know who was talking. Because the thing for me, it's like if any kind of game, sometimes I forget what the name of the character is. So I'm just so like engrossed in the story. Sometimes it's just hard to be able to know, like remember all the characters, especially if there's a game that has a lot of characters in. Like Assassin's Creed was really hard for me. Like I'm so glad they had the speaker tag on, because I'm like, wait, who is this guy? Who is this guy again? Anyway, but I kept that was my personal thing. So I had text size set to 9 within the game. I had transparent I had background turned on, and then I had speaker name on, which was great. As far as the other for low vision, it was like I said, the kind of the beginning with the difficulties. It was hard to learn the timing for parrying. Like even unblockable moves were unblockable moves are okay because you're able to dodge out of the way, but parrying, I just could not seem to get the timing down. Like I said before, it was difficult to, like, as I think I would learn how an enemy sort of attacks, and I can sort of figure out kind of the timing of it, but once I figure out the timing of it on one particular spot, the next spot later, it's just like, why am I not able to parry these guys' attacks? I've already done that before, so it felt inconsistent with my timing, and I don't know if that's me or if that's the game. I'm willing to bet that's probably more me, because or I don't know. It could, like, I honestly don't know. It just, without really kind of knowing, like, hands-on into the sort of how they built the pairing system, it was difficult for me to be able to get that timing down. And I know that my eye-hand coordination isn't great, but even at a lower, like on the Jedi Knight level, it was still really difficult to be able to get that timing right. Even when I'm sort of like, even because you can push, or you can hold the parry button to kind of like do an automatic sort of parrying blocks, but in order to be able to break the defenses of an enemy, you had to time the strikes of what they're hitting you with, whether it's like creatures with their arms or claws, or with stormtroopers, like when they're shooting at you, or they're pairing with like a melee weapon. It would, like, if you couldn't get the timing right, in order to be able to get the timing right, you had to push the parry button at the right time, and I just could not figure out that timing. I could do okay if I was holding the parry button, and especially like for certain enemies, it kind of gave me a little bit of break to sort of take a look at my surroundings to figure out which enemy I needed to fight next. But beyond, like, when I'm actually actively like one-on-one with, oops, sorry, hit the mic, one-on-one with an enemy that it was a melee attack, it was hard to be able to figure out what the timing was. Even if I've already seen that animation of them attacking so often, it just was, I just never got it down. And so that's why I dropped it down to story mode. And then it became a little bit like more forgiving, especially because the amount of damage that they do if you don't hit the parry button right can take away, like on Jedi Knight, like almost half your health if it's a specific type of enemy, and within like 2 maybe 3 hits, like you're kind of done, and you're looking for like to be able to either get away or a stim. And especially like when it has like very limited amount of like meditation points, and you get so far into a section, and then when you die and then you respawn back in, oh, it just takes so long to be able to do that. I'll get into sort of like the more technical kind of general glitches of it, but that's one of them for sure. Is the respawn level of this is difficult. It takes a long time, longer than you'd like to be able to respawn within this game. Essentially, like it comes up with a respawn menu that takes a little bit longer for the button prompt to be able to come up, so you can be able to hit A to respawn, and then the loading times to get you back to a meditation point is sometimes it can get up to like 30 seconds before you're back into it again. So I wish there was an easier way to be able to go about it, like similar to, because they have like different sort of respawn. Like if you are doing a jumping platforming puzzle and you fall, it basically immediately takes you right back to where you just were. Now, unfortunately, if you're in Jedi Knight difficulty and above, you do lose health every time you do that, and you could die if you keep repeating the same mistakes in those climbing and climbing puzzles. That's why the beauty of story mode is at least it doesn't do that to you. So, because it was actually one point, it was also on Dathomir, where you're doing like you're in this sort of like sliding kind of puzzle, where essentially like you're just sliding down this mud kind of like a thing, and you have to try to be able to, it's a bit of a platforming thing, you have to hit the timing just right. I think it probably took me a good solid 5 minutes just to try to get past it. And if I had it on Jedi Knight difficulty, I would have died a lot. I would die very quickly because of just how much it takes off of the health for you, and any other like higher up difficulty level. So I will say, like, it just, I wish that the loading times would be a little bit more less, very similar to, like, if it was similar to how it was when you fall and get back up again. If it was quicker than that, like if it was just as quick as that, then it wouldn't be as bad, I feel, or at least as frustrating. It would have been still frustrating trying to be able to defeat all the enemies before you get to another meditation point, but part of the frustration was mainly the load times, and I wish that they were able to find a way to be able to fix that or speed that up. And I don't know whether that's a limitation of the hardware or limitation of the game. It's having to try to reload an environment, which is very possible, but I just wish they figured out a way to be able to make it a little bit more efficient. But anyway, I will kind of going back to show the combat, like when I said regards to timing, it was much easier for me to be able to dodge out of the way than it was to parry. Actually, that was kind of the strategy that I took, even when I was in story mode, was that I would generally dodge out of the way of an enemy's attack instead of trying to be able to parry them and block and break down their defenses. Because what I would do is I would dodge out of the way, or I would jump out of the way, and then I would sort of use the rush attack to try to get back into close combat with an enemy, and then I would literally just hack and slash to try to break down their defenses, and then I would sort of, like, when I see that they're about to be able to do some attacks, I would dodge out of the way again, and it was sort of like a back and forth. And unfortunately, like, sometimes I would run out of force power, so I wasn't able to do the dash, so I kind of had to sort of like sprint and run to be able to attack, and that was difficult to a certain degree, kind of like to get past it. It made the fight a little bit longer, but it was still, to me, it still felt like that I was still a Jedi, even though it was the story mode can be very much hack and slash. I still felt like a Jedi every time I went into a boss fight or any fight. It felt like that I was still, even with that lower difficulty setting, still felt like I was learning the way of the lightsaber and how to be able to properly not say properly, but how to utilize and fight with a lightsaber. So that was really cool. But like I said, I found it much easier just to dodge out of the way than it was to parry. As far as other low vision accessibility, it isn't like there is some contrast between the enemies and you and the environment, but not a lot. Sometimes it can be difficult to find where, say, a stormtrooper is. If they're like up at a high elevation and they're shooting at you, it takes a little bit for me to took a little bit for me to be able to kind of find where they were. Stormtroopers are a little bit easier to see because generally they're white, but purge troopers or even sort of the higher end commando troopers, essentially they kind of wear all black. They're a little bit more like the troopers that are designed to be able to know, to be able to they're trained to attack Jedi, and those sometimes were hard to see. The good thing is that you would only see them really in Imperial bases throughout the system that you're in. But even then, it can be sometimes it's harder to kind of separate them from the environment. The only way to really kind of know that they're there is to, like, you see like sort of like the purple lightning effect that they have on their weapons, their melee weapons, that you can be able to, that sort of just stands them out from the environment. I will say the game can be like, it's pretty bright. There are certain areas actually where you have to, it gives you like like the good thing is actually that BD1 has a little flashlight that can kind of like at least give you some sort of visibility in a dark environment. But they also do have the option that if you're not in combat and you push technically the parry button, which is the LB button, it will actually kind of lift your lightsaber up in the air and it kind of would illuminate more of the environment. And that's great, but it doesn't allow you to sprint or like you're essentially walking. You're at a walking pace when you're doing that, so you can't really move quickly through that. So I didn't really I had the lightsaber out, but sometimes I would not necessarily like have it like up and in a parry mode, or so I can be able to see more in the environment. I just sort of like, okay, it gives me enough illumination to move in the environment, but not necessarily to see it fully illuminated. So it's kind of difficult at those situations, but you don't really see a lot of enemies in those kind of dark areas. There's one in particular I keep thinking of that essentially like you do see a few creatures that kind of attack you in a dark environment, and those are kind of hard to see unless you're like unless you have your lightsaber out. And sometimes like I see the effect that they're going for. They're trying to scare you. It's kind of like a jump scare almost to a certain degree, but it's still difficult to see where they are. I will say like the only time you can really kind of know an enemy is there, or at least is once their health bar or their parry or their defense bar kind of comes up above their heads, and you can kind of see them all at a given point, but you only see them if you attack them once. So if you're looking, if an enemy attacks you and like from a distance, and you can't see where they are, you can't just look for the health bar for them to be able to know where they are. You have to like actively try to be able to look. It didn't really affect me too much as someone with low vision, but the contrast could have been at least a little bit better, especially for the creatures. The stormtroopers, they're white, they're easy to spot kind of almost immediately. I would say Zepho is probably the only one that was difficult, just because there's snow, there's ice, and there's also a bright sky, so sometimes it can be difficult to be able to pick out the enemies from that. But the majority of the planets you're on, they're kind of like have their own sort of like color scheme, and white is something that you're not really seeing that much of in regards to enemies. So I would say, yeah, the contrast could have been definitely better. The HUD is actually not as bad as I thought. Like, I was able to see at a glance how much health I had, being able to see how many stims I had to be able to kind of up my health from, because BD1 you can be able to hit the up button, and BD1 will launch a stim, and you can be able to give yourself some health. It was difficult to see how many stims you had left, and the only time I could be able to tell if I ran out was essentially if I hit it, and I can hear a little bit of a sound effect that it's basically I've run out. The only way to be able to get those back is either you find a stim container, which will actually increase the amount of stims you get, but it would also you would have to basically go to a meditation point and then rest. And unfortunately, when you rest at a meditation point, essentially all the enemies that you've defeated now respawn back in. And if you're in a difficult spot where essentially it's like you've already cleared a certain area, but you haven't got to another meditation point, you're gonna have to redo all those, re-kill all those enemies again because of that. So it's sort of like you have to balance out how many stims you get before you move on to the next section. Because sometimes, like, it's a little bit difficult for that. But I mean, HUD wise, I didn't like, you could like, I would say that probably the defense or your defense meter and your force meter could be a little bit bigger because it is down the bottom in the center. But if it was a little bit bigger, that because there were many times where I was using force powers and then all of a sudden I realized I ran out. Like I have to wait for it to recharge, and I would hear a sound effect for it to saying that I'd run out, but it just wasn't like visually I couldn't see at a glance like I could with health. I mean, I don't know. I was able to pay attention more to health because it was in the bottom left corner, and it stood out a little bit more as comparison to the defense and force meters. Like if they were a little bit bigger, or at least not in an area or it like maybe above the health bar, it would have been a little bit easier for me to see at a glance. But those were the only two that was harder to sort of catch quickly just by when you're like in a fight, because that's the thing. It's like if the game is able to give you a certain amount of information in this sort of as close to the center screen as possible, you don't have to use a lot of your and you can or have it in the periphery where it's a little bit it's easier to quickly look at a glance to see what your health meter is at. Then that'd be great. For me, generally the better place for me personally is either at the bottom left corner, because then I can sort of quickly take a look. But that would say like the defense and force meter was a little bit harder to see at a glance. Other than that, I mean, actually when you're in a boss fight and you can see like the enemy's health bar at the top, that's actually pretty good, because I can quickly see at a glance, okay, they're at halfway dead or whichever, they've taken this much damage. That was kind of good to see. The font size for it, not super great. Again, the font size for the HUD isn't great. Could have been a bit bigger, I think, without really kind of ruining the aesthetic of the environment. But I was okay with it. It wasn't too intrusive, but I know that can be an issue for those who have less vision than I do. So that's kind of my thoughts on the low vision accessibility. General accessibility, I've already talked about subtitles, so hard of hearing. Like I said, it would have been great if it sort of did that for sound effects, or at least for when anyone's trying to be able to attack you. I would say, oh yeah, no, I did what I think I mentioned before, where all the dialogue was subtitled. Yes, all the dialogue is, but all the with the prompts of when you hear an enemy kind of call out and attack you. Actually, you know what? Stormtroopers, yes, I could hear. Like, yeah, I think there was certain moments. I remember correctly. I think there was certain moments where an enemy, you can hear an enemy about to attack, and they're shouting or whichever. Stormtroopers, you can be able to, I remember seeing the subtitles for them, but for any other enemy, I didn't really see a lot of. Maybe I just wasn't really that super paying attention about it. But I would say yeah. But as far as overall, the sound effects of knowing where enemies are kind of attacking from would have been great, but they don't have a subtitles option for that. So fortunately, you just kind of have like it does at a certain point in the game. You can kind of unlock that if you're sprinting, your lightsaber will automatically parry any sort of blaster attacks at you, which is great. But you have to. It's just sad that you have to kind of unlock that as an ability later on without it sort of being kind of that capability. It does to a certain degree. If you push and hold the parry button, it will kind of just automatically block any blaster attacks coming at you. But that can be tiring if you're having to be able to hold that all the time, especially if you're trying to be able to attack another enemy and there's someone shooting you from behind you and you can't hear it, so you can't really dodge out of the way. That would have been great. Motors, for motor disabilities, you can remap all the controls, which is great. You can be able to remap and make it a little bit easier. You can't be able to do stuff like you can be able to play the game one-handed. But you can remap to certain buttons, at least on the Xbox. I think you can be able to do that on PC and PlayStation as well. So that's great. Motor-wise, though, this would be a difficult game to play if you have difficulty with trying to be able to hit certain buttons at a specific times because of how much the game is based on timing. Even at a story mode level, I can definitely see that there were moments where, if like for myself, I could be able to do, I can sort of keep hitting the attack button or the dodge button or the force button, but it's like when you're having to be able to do all that and you're having difficulties with your hands or any particular motor disabilities, those quick actions are not gonna, like, it's not gonna be super great. You could probably do it, but it's not the best. So because of how complex the combat is in this, you probably would be only able to do story mode. I mean, that's up to you. I mean, if you've kind of grown accustomed to those kind of games, if you play like a Souls game, it's that, like, and you're able to do that, and you have a motor disability, you probably could be able to do okay in this. But if you're just sort of like, if you never really played a Souls game before, this might be a little bit difficult for you to be able to play. For cognitive disabilities, essentially the HUD is fairly clean. Like I said, it's just your health bar, the amount of stims you have, your defense block, your defense meter, and your force meter, and then any of the sort of button prompts on like that. It kind of tooltips it kind of comes up with. So it's great, so the HUD isn't really kind of that intrusive. Menus have a lot of information, but it didn't seem overwhelming. There's a lot of sort of like big buttons and sort of big icons and sort of certain big text. When you're having to try to be able to read the lore of an enemy you just defeated, or lore that you pick up within the game, because there's things called force echoes that you can sort of learn a little bit more about the lore of the story within the world itself. Obviously the text can be a little bit bigger, but it didn't seem to me that it was super overwhelming. It would be overwhelming if you're in regards to combat, because you're having to be able to do a lot in a short period of time, especially if there's like multiple types of enemies attacking you. I did find one tip online that says it's better to be able to clear out the easier enemies first and then go for the harder enemies as you go. But sometimes that's difficult, because when you're going for easier enemies, then the higher end enemies are attacking you and you can't really block them that well. So I think cognitive wise, it can be a little bit overwhelming at times. So I would say if you're using the sort of spoon theory, if you don't have a lot of spoons for the day to be able to play this, I would recommend it when you have a little bit more of a bigger supply of spoons to play this game. It can be stressful like I said, when multiple enemies attack, so that can be a bit of an issue, but I didn't really see it as a huge amount, especially when you get into story mode. Like when you get into kind of like Jedi Knight, when you have to be very careful of how much attacks are coming against you, that can be stressful. But for someone like story mode might be the better way to go about it if you have specific sort of cognitive disabilities, so because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But that's also up to you, like how your sort of cognitive affects you. And that's the thing, like a lot of these disabilities, like there's not like an on-off switch for a lot of it. It's very much a spectrum, so it really kind of depends on kind of like, I would say, look at the gameplay, figure out like if you can see for yourself, or able to kind of take a look at, okay, this might be a little bit like, this might be okay, look at the gameplay of it, then you can sort of determine based on that. That's the thing with a lot of these disabilities. Like the good thing is that a lot of gameplay is out now, so you can kind of tell whether or not a game is set for you. So that's kind of like my general overall accessibility. Like I said, it does a lot of cool things with the gameplay. It kind of borrows a lot from Uncharted. It kind of borrows a lot from Souls games. Borrows a lot from from Star Wars. It kind of borrows a lot from even God of War to a certain degree. So there's a lot, like even Metroidvania. It's very Metroidvania kind of style. So, like I said, it kind of is a jack of all trades, but a master of none, a master of Star Wars, and it's great. And I do know that, like, I will have to say there are some bugs. They're definitely like they're a little bit longer. Like I said, longer load times. There's even times where essentially, like you're like it will, like when you're going from one area. If you go to an area. And then you double back, and if you go back into a different area, it stutters and freezes, and it's because it's trying to be able to load back in the environment again. And I've noticed that quite a few times, especially like even when you're like when you're in an elevator or you're in basically when you're in an elevator and you kind of move around or you take a look at the map real quick, like it sort of starts to stutter and freeze the game. Like even the map on your that's another thing I didn't even mention. The maps in this game is really difficult and complex. Like it took me a good couple hours for me to actually actively see, like, look at where it is where I was and kind of where I needed to go, because there's just so many layers, and it's so like I can see that there's a Star Wars-ish element, a hologram element to it, but it was so like there's so many times that the maps would, like, the different levels with the maps will overlay against each other, and it was just a garbled mess. So the map, I would say, definitely for low vision or any just type of vision is hard, and it can be overwhelming even for a lot of different sort of disabilities. So it's not the best map to be able to take a look at. But also, like, kind of going back in sort of the bugs, there'd be times I would say, okay, I'm at the holo map on your ship, and you're choosing a planet to be able to go to. You can't just, like, for me, if you select a map or you select a planet and you want to see the map of that planet, it takes a long time for it to load in, and like to the point where I was like, I'm not gonna use that functionality. I'm just gonna go straight to the planet and then wait till I get off and then load the map, because it's so long and so buggy and just takes so long to load, that I'm like, no, forget it. I'd just rather not use it. So there definitely is quite a few bugs. I think it's been fixed relatively, because I got this game kind of, I guess, after the 1-day patch. So I wasn't really kind of, I didn't see a lot of the other bugs that sort of the reviewers when the critics they got it. What they were having. I didn't really see as many as what they were mentioning, but there definitely still is some bugs upon launch, even after launch. But other than that, it's like I said, those pale in comparison to the story of this game. If you love Star Wars, you gotta play this game. Respawn did this game right and did this franchise right. Like I said, like I think I said at the beginning of this, like I was scared a little bit when EA, when all the trouble they were having with the Star Wars franchise, but I was once I saw what Respawn was working on, and I was like, okay, I get it. And Star Wars is very well in good hands with Respawn, for sure. And like I said, one of my best stories of the year. I would probably say overall, like in conclusion, buy this game. For me personally, I liked it. I enjoyed it. It's one of the rare games I'm able to actually roll credits on into a story. So take that with what you will. It's difficult at times when you want it to be, and sometimes it's frustrating, but it can be forgiving if you sort of adjust as you go. So I would definitely recommend it. It gives my sort of blind gamer seal of approval, and I would say it's definitely a contender for my own personal game of the year, for sure. Like I said, not the most accessible game of the year, but overall, for my own personal taste, it's high up there in that list. So that being said, I've rambled on for quite a while. I've rambled on for now over an hour. I hope this is okay. I hope this is all right for you. If you like this, give it a like or a review on iTunes or any other podcast service that you're using. And I definitely appreciate you checking this out. As always, I remain obedient to yours. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. And let me know what you thought. Let me know what your thoughts of the accessibility. If you have any specific questions, leave them in the comments or tweet at me at Steve Saylor, and I'll try to respond as best I can. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, I remain obedient to yours. Bye.